is to look formally at the methods that we use to organize the speech. And what we're talking about here in organizing the speech are the main points. The body of the speech is what we're talking about. Okay. So we're going to we've gathered our materials. Let's say that our file folder has all of our materials in it that we've gathered about our topic. Now we're going to put that into an organized, logical sequence in our outline. This is when the outline work begins. By choosing the right organizational pattern, it will help us to do that. Okay. So most speeches have between 2 and 5 main points. Some may have a few more, but you must have at least 2 main points in your speech. You cannot have a speech without having 2 main points. That's called the principle of division. When you divide something, you have to divide it at least into half. Okay, so you end up with 2 parts. So that's why you have to have 2 points. All right, so minimum of 2 points. Average is 3. The average speech has 3 main points. And the first pattern that we can talk about is called the chronological order. What does chronological mean to you? Numbers, time, okay? So in the chronological organizational pattern, we are listing things in our outline in a time or step or number organization. We're listing, this is where the demonstration speech would fall in terms of organizational patterns, because we have steps in a process, step 1, step 2, and so on. So it would go under a chronological organizational pattern. If we're doing things by time, say we're doing a biography of someone's life, and we actually want to do it, birth, middle years, late years, then we would do that in a chronological pattern. Can you think of other topics that might fall into a chronological pattern? What are some of the topics you guys are thinking of? Let's see if it falls in a chronological pattern. Maggie.
Sorry. Go ahead. I wasn't thinking about it, but like the different wars, like over.
Okay, so if I can get them out. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, all of those would be in a time-oriented sequence. Brooke?
Stages of a disease.
Stages of a disease would be in a chronological or step-by-step oriented particular organizational pattern. Our example in the textbook is about building the Great Wall. They start out at the beginning, they do the middle years, and then they do when it was completed. Okay. So we could do this backwards. It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, but we could. There are some that we could do backwards. That we would have to be careful about making sure it made sense. Okay, so that's chronological. That's a pretty easy pattern to pick. So your topic might fit into the chronological pattern. The next one is called spatial order or spatial organizational pattern. And this one has to do with the way things are interconnected or directional. It's 2 parts to the spatial, interconnected or directional. What can you think of that's interconnected that we might do a speech on? That's interconnected. Think of anything? How about the human body? Our systems are interconnected. And so we might do a speech on the human body, and we might talk about the muscle system and the nervous system and the circulatory system. We would do those in a spatial order because they're interrelated. They're also directional. Directional could also mean geographic directions. We could do one on Louisiana, North Louisiana, Central Louisiana, Southern Louisiana. Okay, geographically directional. Right. This is a really good example. It's about a hurricane. And we can't really have one part of the hurricane without the other, or it wouldn't be a hurricane. Right. So spatial order really shows the interconnectivity of things, and they really can't be without the others. Okay. So we have the center, we have the eye wall, and we have the rain bands. Now we could reverse this one and it would make sense in a spatial order. We could talk about rain bands first.
The outer to the inner.
The outer to the inner, and that would make sense. That would be okay. Can you think of any other topics that might fall under spatial order? Anything else? Any of your topics? What are you guys thinking of? Interconnected? No, nobody's thinking of spatial order. Well, you might come up with something. How the engine works.
What, wouldn't your diseases fall under that too?
It could.
You can do them.
It could. Yes, it could. Especially if we were talking about how one disease affects different parts of the body. Okay, so they could go here. Could go under chronological, but could also go here depending on how you're going to treat them. So you have to think about your main points. You have to think about your topic and how you're going to treat the topic in order to find a really good organizational pattern. Right? Describe it away. Yes. Yeah, you could. Okay. So spatial order. All right. The next one is causal. Don't see this as casual. It's causal. And this is usually a 2 main point speech about cause and effect. The oil spill was the cause of the detrimental effects to the environment in the Gulf. So cause and effect. What else can you think of under cause and effect? Anything? Maggie?
Like if you smoke cigarettes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Cause and effect, or drink, or text. Some of this lends itself to topics that are highly persuasive. So this is used in a persuasive endeavor a lot of the time, cause and effect. But it can be informative if all we do is say this is the cause and this is the effect, and we don't tell people what to do.
Right.
Okay? We can do those kinds of topics. This one is it's in your textbook, and so I went ahead and used it. It's okay, but I think it's a little ambiguous. I think we could talk about more concrete topics. What this is saying is the U.S. aviation system faces a growing shortage of qualified air traffic controllers. That's the cause. The shortage is the cause. The effect is airline safety. Okay? I think it says it in a bunch of jumble of words here that could have been more straightforward, but that's what it means. Okay. All right, so that's causal. The next one is also used primarily in persuasive speeches, and it's called problem solution. Problem solution. Usually a 2 main point speech. Very simply, you point out the problem and you point out the solution. And again, in informative speaking, you would simply give that information and not try to tell people or not try to persuade them to take the solution or not take the solution. You would just give them the information. This one is a little more difficult to do as an informative organizational pattern, but it's a very powerful, persuasive pattern. And in fact, you're going to use this pattern. You're going to add some things to it, but you're going to use this particular pattern for your persuasive speech in this class. So you'll be using problem solution. Example, puppy mills are serious problems. The solution takes legislation and individual initiative. I think more simply stated, puppy mills are a problem. Stop buying from puppy mills is the solution. Okay. Stop buying from pet stores and those kinds of places would be the solution. Again, highly persuasive, or can be highly persuasive. The last one is called topical order. And this one arranges the main points in a logical arrangement based on the fact that they don't fit in any other organizational pattern. So you use the topical organizational pattern when your topic and your main points don't fit any of the other patterns. All right. If we're going to do our diabetes example, we're doing symptoms, treatment, and prevention. We would probably put it under topical order because although we might could make the case for spatial order because they are somewhat interconnected, but they would probably fit better under topical order because they don't fit chronological, not in the way we're going to do them. They don't fit cause and effect. They don't fit problem solution. So we might choose the topical order. But we don't choose topical order just to lump everything into an outline, into a speech. Okay, don't take the lazy way out and choose topical just because you don't want to see if it fits the other ones. All right. So we might do a biography in topical order and treat it a little differently than we would in chronological. We might take aspects of a person's life and use them as our main points instead of their years. Like in this example of Josephine Baker. She was a spy, she was a civil rights activist, and she was an entertainer. So we could do those three topics about her in a topical order. And we could do them in any order. It wouldn't really matter what order we did them in. We could talk about her as an entertainer, as a spy, and as a civil rights activist. We're not talking about her life from birth to death. We're talking about segments of her life. Make sense? Okay. Many of your topics will fall in this category, and that's fine, as long as that's where they logically fit. So what are some other topics we could put under topical order?
Julianne Hough, she's an actress, a singer, and a dancer.
Okay, so you can do that in that order. What else? What are some other topics you guys are thinking about? What are some topics you're thinking about? Are you thinking about topics? Gotta switch that gear on in there. You could do some sports under this if you wanted to. You might do football. You might do offensive line, defensive line. 2 main point speech, but that would be topical order. Okay. All right. So a couple of other tips that we want to keep in mind is, and this is really common sense, but sometimes we have to say common sense things to understand them. You want to keep your points separate. What that means is you've got your file folder full of materials that you have gathered. You want to make sure that you get everything you need that you have under main point 1 in main point 1. Don't have information about main point 1 down in main point 3. Make sure you have all of your material for each main point in that main point. So keep them separate. Don't blend them together. Try for the same pattern of wording, same indentation, the same, if you're using Roman numerals, stick with Roman numerals, those kinds of things. And we're going to look at outline format next time, and we'll be more specific about the format. But you want to make sure that you balance the time that you devote to your main points. You don't want a speech that's real heavy on the first main point and real light on the other two. You want to, they don't have to be exact. You don't have to have 2 minutes on each main point exactly, but somewhere around that. You want to balance the amount of time that you devote to each main point so that it is sensible. Okay, so one's not longer than the other. All right. The supporting materials that we're talking about are all those things that you're gathering, and they go. You'll have your outline, and you'll have the body of the outline. You'll have the Roman numeral as your first main point. Your supporting materials are what go in your subpoints. So you might have A, B, C, and D under your first main point.
Right.
Okay, this supports that. So that's why that's called supporting materials. Okay, these subpoints support your main point. All right. Now, an outline is sort of like a roadmap. It guides the speaker and where and which way to go during the speech. We have our body, we have our main points, and I said keep them separate, right? Well, logically, we have to somehow connect them to each other. We have to connect the dots, but we do it by using what's called a connective. And there are several connectives that the chapter talks about. Transitions, internal previews, internal summaries, and signposts. The one that you are responsible for doing in your speeches in here is the transition. You do not have to use internal preview, internal summary, or signpost. You probably will, but I'm not specifically listening for those while I'm grading your speech. I am specifically listening for transition statements. So what's a transition statement? Anybody want to guess? Okay, when you're changing things.
Like a transition, like word?
You're going to use transition words like a transition word. It's similar to when you're writing a paper and you have a transitional phrase to the new paragraph. It's very similar to that. It goes in between the main points. So in between each main point, you're going to have a transition statement. And it is going to refer to both of those points. A transition statement tells the audience when the speaker has finished one point and is moving on to the next point. It's sort of like you're driving and somebody's following you and you're fixing to make a turn and you put your turn signal on to tell them you're going to make a turn. That's what a transition statement is. It's a turn signal. I have finished this main point and now I'm moving on to the next one. Because your audience does not have a script of your speech. So they don't know what direction you're going in. So you have to tell them. In our diabetes example, symptoms, treatment, and prevention are our main points. We're going to go from symptoms to treatment. Our transition statement would sound something like this. Now that we've talked about the symptoms of diabetes, let's turn our attention to how to treat it. Okay, very specific. I've got both points in there, the one I'm leaving and the one I'm going on to. Now you can be more creative than that, but make sure you get both points in there. Okay, so in between each main point. So if you have a 3 main point speech, how many transition statements are you going to have?
3.
2. Between the main points. You don't need one going into the conclusion because you already have one built into the conclusion. Okay. So if you have 3 main points, you're going to have 2 transition statements. 4 main points, you're going to have 3. Okay. They're very important. I cannot stress enough how important these transition statements are. If you don't do a transition statement in your speech and you run together 2 main points, you're going to confuse your audience. Because they're going to be thinking, well, we were just talking about this. When did we switch? Okay, so that's a good way to confuse your audience is to not do a transition statement. So they're really important. You need to know what the other ones are, internal previews and internal summaries and signposts. So we'll just go over them really quickly. An internal preview is you're in the middle of your speech and you tell the audience what is still to come. An internal summary, you're in the middle of your speech, you tell the audience what you have covered thus far. And a signpost is, and you'll probably use a signpost, without really realizing it. These are words or phrases that indicate where you are right then and there at that moment in the speech. So if you're doing a demonstration speech and you're doing steps, you might say, the first step is, well, the phrase, the first step is a signpost. Or you might be listing things and you might say, first, you need this. First is your signpost. In conclusion is a signpost. In summary is a signpost. So you'll probably use a signpost. But like I said, I'm not listing for them independently. Okay. All right. So any questions about organizing